Before we begin our event, we want to take a moment to reflect on the lands on which we reside. We come from many places and want to acknowledge the ancestral homelands and traditional territories of the indigenous peoples who have been here. San Diego Mesa College is built on the ancestral homelands of the Kumeyaay people. We acknowledge and honor their tremendous contributions to our region and thank them for their stewardship, past, present, and future. We also want to honor the legacy of the African diaspora, Black life, and the free enslaved labor which this country was built upon. We acknowledge, protect, and uplift the humanity of our Indigenous and Black sisters and brothers. With this acknowledgement, we want to give honor through our work and continue to stand up for racial and social justice. Thanks for coming. My name is Wendy Smith. I'm a facilitator for today's event, which is being recorded to share with those who cannot attend. Please fill out our survey. The link is in the chat. This helps us learn more about our audience and improve what we do. I teach English composition courses with the theme of ethnography and qualitative research. In other words, we study work by people who do research for a living. Today we'll hear about the college and career journey of Lindsey Kunisaki, Research and Evaluation Specialist at the UCLA Visual and Performing Arts Education Program, also known as VAPAE. Shall we get started?
Thank you so much, Wendy, for that warm welcome. I will go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully we are in business. All right. So thank you again, Wendy, Professor Smith, and many thanks to Katlin for the invitation to be here. Really excited to share a bit about my own ethnographic pathway, the ways that writing show up in my research and my professional life. But before we dive in, I thought we'd maybe just take some time to get to know each other here in the room. So on the next few slides, I'll show a few statements, and I wondered if we could think about the extent to which you agree or disagree with them, just as of now where you are. And if you could, give it some thought and then just type a number right into the chat. We'll keep it informal that way. So the first prompt is this. So I am a writer. So think about whether you strongly agree, and if you strongly agree, you can enter a 5, 4, kind of agree, 3, neither agree nor disagree, 2, kind of disagree, and 1, strongly disagree. Okay. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so now the next one. How about I am a data person? So again, 5, strongly agree, 4, kind of agree, 3, neither agree nor disagree, 2, kind of disagree, and 1, strongly disagree. All right. Thank you all. Okay, this is the last one. So now, I know exactly where I want to be in 5 years. So again, 5, strongly agree, 4, kind of agree, 3, neither agree nor disagree, 2, kind of disagree, and 1, strongly disagree. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Well, I want to thank you all for your responses. This, I think, gives us a sense of where we're all at today, knowing that some of these might change if we asked again tomorrow, in a week, in a year. And so I'm here to say that is not only okay, it's also necessary, because we're all on our own journeys, and yeah, things are sure to change along the way. And so I'll just say it's great to meet you all. And as I reflect on those prompts, I know that my responses to those would have changed a lot over time. So in our time together today, I'd like to share some of the steps that have led to where I am now and how they're kind of moving me forward. So I'll share about some choices that I made, for better or for worse, and also how I navigated a lot of this as a young Asian American woman navigating academic, professional, and creative spaces that were often dominated by whiteness, by patriarchy, and ageism, knowing that sometimes the stories that I was being told about myself didn't always match what I believed to be true and how I kind of found some ways to rewrite those stories. So I'm really looking forward to being in conversation with all of you in our Q&A time at the end. But in the meantime, feel free to send any questions that you might have right here in the chat, and we'll keep an eye out. Okay. So to start, I thought I'd share some highlights from my academic journey. So I earned my Bachelor of Arts from UCLA. I started out with a major in ethnomusicology, which is the study of music and culture, basically. And actually, much of the work that we studied in that program was actually based in ethnographic research. So that was kind of my first introduction to the idea of ethnography. I loved it, and I loved the community that we were building there. But I decided that I had some other questions that I wanted to explore in my academic studies. So I changed my major and actually decided to create my own. So it was an interdisciplinary course of study where I was taking courses from all different kinds of departments and kind of weaving together those perspectives to shape my own learning. So from there, I went on to get my master's degree at Harvard University. In my case, I decided to go right after my undergraduate studies because of some restrictions that were related to my scholarship. But there, I learned a lot of the professional skills that are still a huge part of my working life today. Then, after a few years of working in the field of arts education, I decided to pursue my PhD in education at Claremont Graduate University. So not everyone needs a PhD, but in my case, I realized that my work was becoming increasingly involved with research and evaluation. So I knew I wanted to kind of sharpen my skills in those areas, and the PhD program turned out a great way to do that. So it's still a work in progress. Stay tuned. Hopefully by this time next year, I'll have reached the light at the end of that tunnel. But in any case, so these are kind of the main highlights of my academic journey. This is what shows up on my resume. But really, this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. So what's below that surface level picture is a bedrock of mentorship, financial and social support that's been hugely influential in getting me through this journey. So first, with mentorship here, I'm thinking about my family, teachers, academic counselors, professors in high school and actually in community college. I went to high school at Bonita High School here in Los Angeles County, studied with some great teachers in music and art and many other things. At Citrus College, which is a nearby community college, I studied music technology and later continued taking private lessons from my professor there. And all of these mentors helped me see what possibilities were out there, especially given my financial concerns. So having grown up in a time of financial crisis, that meant a lot of hardship on the world at large. But for me and in my household, that meant that there was a lot of uncertainty about whether I would even be able to afford to go to college. And so thanks to those mentors and many others, I came to kind of understand how financial aid could help me along the journey. So I ended up finding a scholarship that would fully fund my undergraduate and graduate studies all the way through. And ended up finding some other scholarships along the way. And all of that was thanks to the support of these networks who helped me identify those opportunities, encouraged me to reach for them, even when I didn't think I could, and still continue to motivate me to look ahead to my next steps. And so all of that has led to my current work. And at the moment, I'm wearing many different professional hats. So my main role is in research and evaluation with the UCLA Visual and Performing Arts Education Program. So that's an undergraduate program that basically prepares people to teach the arts in schools or out of schools. And so we have a number of undergraduate courses that prepare them to do that. Meanwhile, I am also the Laura Zucker Fellow for Policy and Research with Arts for LA. There, I'm conducting some research related to Proposition 28, which in California was passed in November 2022. It's bringing about $1 billion of funding per year into schools for arts education. And so the research that I'm doing there is basically looking at the impact and what that's looking like for our schools and communities. Meanwhile, I'm also working as an independent consultant in evaluation, curriculum design, and strategy. I'll explain more what those mean a little bit later. And I'm also a peer mentor as the student co-director of the Statistical Consultation and Training Lab, also known as Stat Lab, at Claremont Graduate University. So to date, all the activities in my professional life have basically fallen into these 5 kind of main areas. So teaching, curriculum design, administration, research and evaluation, and strategy. So to start out, teaching is sort of what it sounds like. And for me, that's come up in many different settings. At first in one-on-one settings as a tutor or a piano teacher, later on in after-school programs, and now in a graduate program. Another big part of what I do is curriculum design. So curriculum design is the practice of developing the kinds of plans that teachers use when they're deciding basically what they want to do in their classrooms. So teachers always come into class with some kind of idea of what they want to accomplish, what they hope their students will learn, and maybe some activities that'll help everyone get there. And so my job as a curriculum designer is to kind of sketch out those goals and figure out what are the longer term results that we ultimately want to see. Another area of practice for me has been administration. And so for me, this has been in arts education organizations. And that's looked like, basically managing the nuts and bolts of what keeps a program running. So that's everything from scheduling and transportation to communications and decision-making and kind of everything in between. Most recently, my work has become really grounded in research and evaluation. So these 2 terms are closely related, but can differ slightly in their audiences and purposes. But in my case, they've both been a big part of my professional life. So both research and evaluation, both basically ask questions and then find systematic ways to gather information or data that might answer them. So in my research, this often means asking a question that will have meaning to both the participating community and the broader kind of academic field. So it's often asking if there are bigger picture ideas that might apply across many different kind of settings. In evaluation, we also go in with a question in mind, but it's usually more about how well a program is doing and how they can continue to improve. So it's less about the kind of conceptual meaning and more about the actions that will eventually affect the specific setting that I'm studying. So then finally, the last area of practice to highlight here is what I'm calling strategy. And I think of that as kind of what ties it all together. So it's how we understand the quality of what's being taught and learned, how well it's all being managed and executed, and how we can make intentional decisions to take us in the direction that the organization needs to go in order to best meet the interests and needs of the community and also just keep the program running. So in all of these areas, writing comes up in many different ways. In teaching and curriculum design, the writing that I'm doing often comes up as lesson plans. So I'm communicating to teachers what we're aiming for and how to get there. In administration and strategy, writing comes up in collaboration and communication. So I'm often in conversation with many different types of communities or individuals, and it's important to know what information each of them needs in order to make the most of our work together. In research, evaluation, and administration, this also comes up in reporting results, of course, because once we've landed on some findings, knowing how to share them in a way that, that makes sense to those who most need to know. Finally, in research, evaluation, and strategy, writing comes up in proposals for funding or what we call grant writing. So here, we're often making some kind of written argument that aims to convince an individual or some larger organization to give resources that would support the work that we do. So essentially, in other words, writing is everywhere in my professional life. It's in everything that I do. And in many ways, so is ethnography. So even when I'm working in different spaces or in a non-research role, I still draw from many of the skills that we often practice as ethnographers. So in teaching, that often looks like observing classrooms. So often the sites that I'm observing are classrooms, museums, or other spaces where learning is happening. And I'm really exercising those observational skills that we know are so important to ethnography. In administration, I often find myself using those really active listening skills. So even when I'm not there as a researcher necessarily, I'm still using those skills as a crucial part of the way that I participate in meetings and kind of encourage informed decision making. In research and evaluation, ethnography generally shows up as centering students' voices. So we know that so much of ethnography is about honoring diverse perspectives, especially when they're from voices that we don't always get to hear. And as a researcher and evaluator, I always try to bring those voices into the conversation in whatever ways I can, especially when decisions are being made about what will affect their futures. So this brings me to advocacy, which may not exactly come to mind as an ethnographic competency, but I believe that it is related. As ethnographers, we take on the responsibility of representing the site or the community that we're studying, and I believe that responsibility means sharing the stories of their strengths, their interests, and the desires for the futures that they want to see. So zooming into the ethnographic work that I do, there are a few key practices that come up often in my current work and are also deeply rooted in some other aspects of my identity and interests that may seem kind of a far stretch from research, but I think that they've helped me develop what I think of as transferable skills or skills that have meaning or use in other settings. So there are many ways that ethnographic competencies come into my life, but I'll highlight just a few. So one might be planning for action, looking and listening, finding patterns, storytelling, and seeking support. And so for each of these, I'll share how they come up in my current ethnographic work, where they're kind of rooted in my past, and then where they're taking me in future directions too. So first is planning for action. Find. So this is something that I think also grew out of my early interest in event production when I was organizing benefit concerts as a high school student. So even then, I was thinking carefully about planning for action, making sure we have all the information we need to make decisions about every little detail from the posters to the decorations and ticketing and seating and all of that. And what that required was knowing the purpose, the audience, and creating an experience that will meet everyone's interests and needs. And believe it or not, I think that that actually connects a lot to the work that I've done in curriculum development, designing learning experiences, setting objectives, identifying outcomes, thinking about what do we want people to learn from this experience and how can we get there together? Looking ahead, this has also, I think, brought me into the work in organizational strategy. So finding out what's going on in our field, what's important to our communities, and then making informed decisions accordingly. So the next key practice that I think has been really important to my work is looking and listening. So in ethnography, this often means like being and staying present. So keeping eyes and ears open to make sure that I can fully experience the setting and the community in it. So this often means that in a classroom full of children or college students, I have to be able to both see the whole picture and stay rooted in my one-on-one interactions with them as I'm looking to build relationships with them and understand their experiences. I think that I can also trace this back to even my early experiences making art and just learning how to notice details. A friend of mine once asked me to teach them how to draw, and I said, it's not just about how you move your pencil across the page. It's also a lot to do with how you perceive the thing that you want to draw. So if you say you want to draw a table, can you notice all of the shapes and forms and angles that make it into what it is? And I think that that's I think, where I started kind of practicing some of those skills. It also came into play in my teaching. So looking really closely at how my students were responding to the lessons, constantly asking myself, how do I know that they know? So paying really close attention to their learning experience and looking for evidence of their understanding. This also connects to, I think, to leadership, where I think about listening closely and finding connections. I believe that a leader's responsibility is to build community and find common ground across multiple perspectives. So when I'm leading a workshop or a meeting and hearing everyone's responses to what's being offered, I'm constantly thinking about how their ideas connect to what we've done and to each other. And that, of course, engages really deep listening and looking skills. Okay. So the next key practice that I think about is finding patterns. So in ethnography, this comes up in data analysis and interpretation, right? So once we've collected the data, then we need to make some kind of sense of it. So sometimes we do this through coding or categorizing the data, maybe finding common themes and interpreting what they mean in terms of our broader research questions. So for me, this has often looked like sifting through pages and pages of my observation notes, looking for evidence of the outcomes that I initially sought, but also sometimes finding new ones that came up along the way that maybe I didn't expect. This habit of finding patterns is something that I think caught my interest first through music theory, in reading, hearing, and implying the way that music works. So most people don't like music theory, but I actually loved it once I came to understand what it is and how I could use it, because it gave me a way to understand the music that I saw written on a page, how it related to what I was hearing, and why music worked, and then how I might use it in my own songwriting. And similarly, this kind of thinking comes up actually in program evaluation. When I've collected a bunch of information about a program or setting, then I have to figure out how that evidence supports the program's theory about why things work and expectations about how those things are happening, and then figuring out how they can improve based on all of that. This also comes into play in a broader sense with data literacy, especially in my quantitative work. Sometimes I'm working with these massive data sets that have way more information than I need for my research questions. And then I have to figure out how to make that data useful and accessible for my team's purposes. So recognizing patterns in it and finding a way to kind of make it our own. Okay. So the next key practice here is storytelling. And so we can probably say that storytelling comes up in pretty much every stage of the ethnographic process. But for me, it's been especially important in writing and reporting the results. And how I tell the story of a classroom or community, I think could have big implications for how others view it, how they understand it, and possibly even how they make decisions about the resources that will go into that space in the future. And so I think that representing a site is a huge responsibility. As a storyteller and as a writer, it's really important to me that I honor it in all of its complexities. And some of this can be traced back to my early interest in songwriting, where I was expressing complex ideas or emotions through very few words. So for me, songwriting at its core is all about communicating an idea concisely, making someone picture a scene or feel a whole world of emotions all in only a few words, and then also trying to make it rhyme somehow. But that idea of making concise arguments also, I think, has been a big part of my grant writing work. So it's writing to a different audience and with the goal of convincing them to support my cause, whether that was funding my college education or bringing music lessons to 4,000 students in LA public schools every week. It was really important to be able to make a point quickly and concisely, because there's often a word count limit when we're writing a grant proposal. And so that means it's harder to make a point and every word has to count. So I also think about this too in all of my presentations, on paper, in person, in words and images, showing and telling stories just like I am now. So reaching audiences through multiple senses to get a point across. And this comes up in everything from academic presentations to board meetings, to teaching statistics, to graduate students, and everything in between. What matters to me is that all of the words and images kind of let the story shine and send the message through. Okay. So the last key practice I wanted to highlight here is seeking support. And in ethnography, this has shown up in the form of collaboration, working closely with a client and anyone else at the site to make sure that I'm seeing what I think I'm seeing. And often related to that, or even before that, comes building real authentic relationships to make space for those honest exchanges. So sometimes if I'm just entering a learning community and just sort of figuring out what some of the dynamics are, it might help to be in dialogue with them or with other collaborators, just to make sure that, that we're understanding what's really going on here. But that instinct to seek support and reach out, I think also came up even early on in my music lessons, asking what it meant to be a musician, learning about the career and the lifestyle, and getting curious about these things as early as possible. It also definitely came up in my undergraduate life, reaching out to professors, academic counselors, and others who could help me kind of navigate all of the nuances of college life, everything from building a new major and choosing classes to funding my studies, and also navigating all of the kind of social and emotional experiences that come with it along the way. Seeking support is also, of course, a big part of networking. So for me, that's meant proactively seeking out a professional community, setting up informational interviews to build relationships with no other ask attached, just for the sake of getting to know someone and maybe getting a glimpse into like a day in the life or the path that led them there. And going in with specific questions and things in mind to get curious about. I think that that's always been a really important part of seeking support. Okay, so to close out, I wanted to just give some final offerings. So the first is to both look in and zoom out. So I would say looking inward to understand yourself, who you are, where you want to be, is just as important as zooming out to see the broader context. Where are you? What do you see and hear? What are others doing? What connections do you find? And I think that all this and all of the other offerings come into play both in our ethnographic work and also just as we're exploring our career journeys. So as an ethnographer, look inward to recognize all aspects of your identity, what that means in the context of this space, and zoom out to understand the site that you're becoming immersed in. This also applies more broadly to the professional journey too, though. So look inward to understand who you are, what you have to offer to the field, and how that fits into the professional context that you'd like to enter. That may or may not align with what others assume about you, but you have the power to change those assumptions. I know that in my case, being a young Asian American woman, people often assume that I'm a data person, that I'm good at math, good at school, might lack leadership or social skills. Little did they know, I hadn't taken a single statistics course before 2019 and was really just kind of okay at math before that. And it's been my great pleasure to also show them my potential as a leader and my interest and engagement with strategic practice. So if you've ever found yourself in similar situations, I know that you'll find a way to rewrite that story too. Looking in and zooming out can be a great first step. Another offering is to choose directions and then set intentions to guide you. So in ethnography, this means maybe setting an intention to explore a research question while also having an openness to new findings that might come up unexpectedly. When you're setting career goals, I've found it helpful to choose a direction, not necessarily a destination. So some of my most fulfilling decisions have been those that led me to lean into a new type of work or a new part of my field. Most recently, this has been in research, evaluation, and cultural policy, but that might look different for you. Regardless, be intentional about the steps that you take in that direction, but stay open to new possibilities that might come up along the way too. And next, build up from what grounds you. So in the ethnographic context, this means knowing who you are and where you stand before entering the space, and then investing some real time and energy to build relationships before the research begins. So that can be the foundation for your ethnographic work to grow. I know that I've found it really helpful to make sure that my first conversations when I'm entering that space, I have no notebook in hand. I'm going in just to connect on a very human level. And that can be a really helpful starting point, I think, for the research process. In the career journey, this also means starting from your strengths and what grounds you, what makes you feel like the best version of yourself, and then build up and build out from there. So you've heard how many of my early interests in music and art have come into play in my professional work in maybe some kind of unexpected ways. Think about where your common threads can come together and how you might bring them into your future with you. And next, find constellations. So as ethnographers, this is so much of what we do, right? We're seeking connections, finding patterns in ways that help us make sense of what we see and hear. In the career journey, when where you are feels like it's far from where you want to be, try to find any connections that you can. Maybe it's a matter of finding a skill that you have that could be transferred into a new professional setting. Maybe it's a matter of finding or building social connections that can get you the support that you need. Which brings me to finally reach out. Ethnographically, this means engaging with community members to the extent that you can, and checking in often to make sure, again, that you're seeing what you think you're seeing. Professionally, put yourself in conversation with others in the field where you want to be. So again, informational interviews, conferences, other events, show up and meet folks, build relationships. If you're interested in what someone does, ask about it. Gather all the information you can to help you make your decisions about your next steps. Whether or not it's a step in their direction, you'll learn more about the field and about yourself in the process. Okay, so that wraps it up for me. Thank you all for tuning in and listening. Please do stay connected. Feel free to shoot me an email. Would love to also connect on LinkedIn. And yeah, I think with that, maybe we can open it up for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Lindsey. That is amazing. I think I'm going to make your talk a must-see for students. I think it has so much information about their current projects, but also careers, because, you know, I've tried to convince them, and I hope I have, that every career needs good writers, and includes writing, and that every career has some kind of research going on in it. Or just about every career. You're doing research so that you can get grant money, or you're doing a survey or a focus group. It happens so much more than they imagine. And I also think I want to do a PowerPoint like yours just to review my whole career. Just to think about the connections among all of the things I've done and continue to do. I think that's really fascinating. And I wonder if it was that way for you too, to put something like this together and see just how much you've really done and what a range.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It was a blast putting this together, and I have so many reasons to thank both of you for the invitation to be a part of this, because yeah, I mean, just the prompt to think about the ways that ethnography shows up and like ethnographic skills show up in so many different ways was such a fascinating one to me, and it really got me thinking about what other skills kind of go into that process and where they came from. And in my case, I sort of like tried to retrace my steps on a lot of them and was kind of surprised by where that process led me because Yeah, I mean, I am someone who's obviously working in the arts, but not exactly someone who is, I mean, I don't consider myself an actively practicing artist by profession, but some of the things that I started exploring through those early interests ended up being really important. So I hope that that's, whether anyone who's watching was, writing songs or drawing pictures like I was, or maybe doing anything else. I hope that this can be an invitation to kind of explore that for themselves too.
Yes, for sure. It made me think of something that Caitlin introduced me to called Year Compass. I was just reaching around my desk for this. Have you ever heard of this?
I have
I
not.
haven't finished this year's. Of course, I've spilled things on it already, but you answer prompts about the past year and your life. And Caitlin and I have done it together a couple of times now, and I've encouraged other friends to do it. You can get it for free at yearcompass.com
Oh,
in case
okay.
anyone's interested.
Yeah, I will have to check that out.
Yeah. I also thought of something I used to do, which is Progoff journal workshops, and it looks like they're called intensive journals now. I think it maybe had Jungian roots. You could spend whole weekends doing this, writing different journal prompts. It was amazing. Anyway, that's a little off topic. Um, I was wondering, Jennifer, as our guest, do you have any questions before I start asking them? Because I have plenty.
I'll hold off on questions for now. So go ahead, Wendy. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Um, So I was talking to students today about their first set of field notes. They've all chosen a field site. Some of them are still, going back and forth a little, but soon their first set will be due. And it's a dual entry, um, report, respond, and then after that, reflect. So I told them that there are a couple of ways to approach a field site. One is with some questions in mind, or maybe even one question, like, um, I'll think of one in a second. I can't seem to pull one out of the air when I'm being recorded, I guess, but just, a question about their site that they would like to see answered in their research. Or they could just come in and gather as much detail as they possibly can and go for, several hours. They have to go for at least 3 hours to their field site, and hopefully different days, but it depends on what they're looking at. And see what kinds of themes and patterns start to emerge. And you seem to say that you sort of do both. You're looking for some of the expected outcomes, but also looking for patterns and what emerges.
Mhm.
Do I have that about right?
Yes, yes. Yeah, and it's always kind of a balancing act of the two. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And go ahead, please.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll say that's a big part of the evaluative ethnographic work that I've done. The part that is sort of predetermined, at least like predetermined in terms of what I'm looking for, that is often because I'm working with a client, or in some cases for my employer, and we have these outcomes in mind that sometimes we're being asked to report on them. Sometimes they're part of the program model that have been kind of built in by design. But a lot of times also there are things happening, maybe bubbling up under the surface that we don't always plan for. Because I know that, so in one example, the undergraduate program that I work for is led by our fantastic lecturers who are all active practitioners, exceptional educators, and artists themselves. And so they're constantly bringing all of these very dynamic activities into the classrooms. And sometimes that means that, even if ultimately we're hoping that our students learn to teach in a classroom, they learn how to like make a lesson plan, they do some reflective writing, they also end up making a lot of art in the process too. And even if that wasn't necessarily one of the things that was sort of like mandated or required, it ended up being like a really important part of the learning experience. And so that felt like something that we definitely wanted to make note of and include in the whole picture of what was going on there. So it's definitely it's kind of managing both perspectives at the same time. It's like what we know we're looking for, and also what we don't expect.
Thank you for that example. I love it. Um, I also thought of something we were working on in class when you talked about looking in and zooming in, but also, no, looking in and zooming out. It's been something I've been thinking about a lot because I think about this more and more in more complex ways the more I teach it. And I think we avoid generalizing about people, but at the same time, we're looking to see like what are the implications of what I'm looking at and how could it apply outside this group, right? So we do kind of generalize, right? We look at this example, maybe it's say an art class, and then we're like, okay, what can this tell us about what other art classes need? Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, so I think that well, the looking in part, I think, is just such an essential precursor to any kind of research work, right? Just like knowing that we are the human instruments that come into to any research space, and just knowing that that puts us in a position to really understand what what that situation is, and understand the lenses that we're viewing the world through. Yeah, and I mean, I think that in terms of applying findings to other areas, I guess like in social science terms, we think about that as like generalizability. And that's, I think, it's a tricky thing, I think, especially in arts education, in my corner, because so much of generalizability assumes that what's going on in one space with one, say, like student population, would produce the same results if it were happening in another space with a similar student population. But in arts education, so I mentioned earlier that like many of our arts educators who come in to teach our courses have all of these like very dynamic and different approaches that they use. And I think that seems to be a common thread with a lot of arts educators. So the way that someone teaches a class or something might be so specific to them, that it's hard to know whether like it really could be generalizable. And I think for us, it often raises big questions about like the extent to which we even want to pursue that as a goal. I mean, we do want to make sure that that our programs are consistent